Hey guys, welcome to Teach Me Math. Today we're going to be looking at the trigonometry of right angle triangles. If you're watching this, then you're probably right into the basics, the intro of trigonometry, and just a little note. I know trig looks very odd and alien, especially since you've been spending the whole year or however long focusing on quadratic equations and polynomials and variables and whatnot. That trigs looks very hard and very weird, but if you just stick to the basics, like learn the basics really well, then you'll see that it'll probably become your favorite topic in algebra and math in general as well. So, alright, let's get into it. So we're going to be looking at the right angle triangle. So, the right angle triangle is this little triangle here. It has a 90-degree angle, and by definition the side opposite the 90-degree angle is termed the hypotenuse. Right? Now this is the longest side of the right angle triangle. It's called the hypotenuse. It's always opposite the 90-degree angle. Now we have these two other angles here, and all three angles in the triangle has to sum to equal to 180. Right, so all angles sum equal 180 degrees. Okay, so if this 90-degree angle is 90, then the two remaining angles here must also equal to 90. Right? So let's look at, so we have two different components of the right angle triangles we're going to look at. First, we're going to look at the Pythagoras theorem. Now this theorem focuses on the sides of the right angle triangle. So this is the hypotenuse. Now we're going to label this A, we're going to label this B, and we're going to label this C. It's important to know that C is the hypotenuse. Pythagoras theorem states that A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. The sum of the squares of the two sides is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. Okay? This is not interchangeable. You can't make C squared plus B squared equals to A squared. It just does not work. This is always the C in this case, right? So it's always the sum of the squares of the two sides is equal to the square of the hypotenuse, right? So if this is a 5 and this is a 7, then you're going to be using this Pythagoras theorem to find the side C, and it's going to be 5 squared plus 7 squared is equal to C squared. So that's going to be 25 plus 49. This is going to be, this is a 4. And this is going to be a 74. Alright, and that's equal to C squared. So this is not 74. This would be the square root of 74, which I do not know off the top of my head. Alright, so also be careful not to forget that this is actually squared. Right? I've seen it happen a lot. I've done it a lot by mistake. So just keep that in mind. So now that we touched on the sides, let's look at the angles. All right? And for angles, we're going to be introduced to a nice little term that you're going to remember for the rest of your life called Sohcahtoa. So before we get into that, or getting into that, so this is our right angle, this is our one side, this is our other side, and this, as always, is the hypotenuse. So let's look at this angle here. We're going to call it x. So this angle x, when in relation to x, so we're on the face of x, when we look across from x all the way down here, we call this side the opposite side. And when we look right next to it, we call this the adjacent side. Now, if we were focusing on a different side, right, if this was our angle y, then opposite of y, this would become the opposite, and this would become the adjacent, right? And this is 90 degrees, so this is always the hypotenuse, regardless of which angle you're looking at. But it's important to see how the perspective changes, what's the opposite and what's the adjacent. All right, so let's focus on x for now. We'll see that this is called sine, so the S stands for sine, the C stands for cosine, and the T stands for tangent. Okay? And this just refers to ratios of the sides of the triangle. So when we look at sine, okay, when we say sine of x, we actually mean the opposite over the hypotenuse. The opposite of x over the hypotenuse of x. Okay, so if we're looking at our numbers for 5, 7, and the square root of 74, right? I'm sure there are easier numbers, but that's just the one that we have right now. The sine of x is going to be the opposite, which is 7, okay, over the hypotenuse, which is the square root of 74. And that's equal to sine x. Cosine x is going to be, I'm sure you've figured it out by now, the A stands for adjacent, so it's going to be 5 over square root of 74. Oh, I should say this is adjacent over hypotenuse. And finally, our tan x is going to be our opposite over our adjacent. And this is equal to our opposite, which is 7, and our adjacent, which is 5. Okay, so that in a nutshell describes Sohcahtoa. Now, what is the point of this? How does this help us find our angle? Well, for now, if you open up your scientific calculator, which I'm doing right now, is that you'll see you'll see the buttons sine, height, well, you see height, sine, cos, and tan, and you'll see just faded just above the sine is the sine inverse 1. Okay, so this sine inverse, sine negative 1, this is called sine inverse. So if you take the sine inverse of this ratio, 7 over the square root of 74, you're going to end up with, let's see, 7 divided by the square root of 74, you're going to end up with a 54.5 degrees. So I just figured out that this angle, x, is equal to 54.5 degrees. Right? Now I could do the same, like I could go to this side and then I'll do the opposite over the hypotenuse, or the adjacent over the hypotenuse, or opposite over adjacent, whatever, and then find the inverse. Or what I could do is that since I know that this is 90, this is 54.5, then I could do 180 minus 90 minus 54.5 is equal, so this is angle y, this angle y is going to be equal to my angle y, right? Because this plus this should all equal to 180. And that way I've found all the angles and all the sides of my triangle. Alright? So that's pretty much the basics of sine, cosine, tangent for right angle triangles specifically. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. Thanks for watching.